Zach, so great to be with you. Yeah, I felt like before we even turned on the recording, we could spend another 2 hours talking before we got to this. But there are demands on our time, especially your time right now. So I guess we could just jump right in. Um, First of all, I just want to thank you for being what I think is a transcendent voice of reason in the midst of a lot of the chaos that's going on in the world right now. And I think you've allowed people to get past polarization and to have a better, more bright and beautiful picture of the future. Um, you've spoken in part about the role that glyphosate, has played in our lives, the negative role, quite frankly, and all the malfeasance around that. And you've spoken that quite eloquently. But recently, you've also talked about that there is a consideration, or maybe multiple considerations, between glyphosate and COVID, and how this might be impacting how people are adapting or not adapting to COVID-19. So, can we talk about that a little bit, or can you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So this requires a little bit of a rearrangement of our understanding of microbiology. The microbiome is a description of the microorganisms that create a complex ecosystem around us, within our bodies, in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we consume. The microbiome is this vast ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, parasites, and this kingdom, covers the earth. In the vast bulk of life on earth is represented in this micro ecosystem, which really covers the macro ecosystems of the planet. And we now recognize in the human body, they are integral to every single organ. We used to think of the microbiome being limited. Oh yeah, you have bacteria in your gut, so maybe you should take a probiotic. That was the limitation in our belief system about bacteria. Turns out that probiotics, of course, are just a drop in the bucket. They actually probably are at risk of doing as much harm as antibiotics and limiting biodiversity. When we think about microbiome, we have to keep the word diversity in there, because there is no such thing as a good bacteria. There's only such a thing as biodiversity. If you lose biodiversity, it doesn't matter which bacteria are left over. They're going to become, agents of disorder and dysfunction, because they've lost their niche within the population, and they're now overgrowing an environment. We see this in small bowel overgrowth, or SIBO, as a condition, whereas this is good bacteria, but they're overgrowing because there's been a loss of the organic garden of the gut. And so biodiversity is the definition of a healthy gut. But we now know that the liver, the bloodstream, the brain itself has microbiome intrinsic to it. And so there's bacteria and fungi and yeast that have to be in the brain to create normal, environmental and ecosystem detoxification, fuel production, and the like. And so we are an organic system. We are an organic garden. We are an organic soil system as a human body. The organisms that we carry far outnumber the human cells. We're somewhere around 50 to 70 trillion human cells. We're at 1.4 quadrillion bacteria. And we're probably 10x that in fungi and yeast. And we're probably 10x that in protozoa. I mean, it's just like these extraordinary numbers. Fungi is just like too big to imagine. We miscategorize the viruses as microbiome. The viruses are not living structures. And so if you look up the definition of micro and biome, it has to be a living organism. The viruses are not living organisms. And so from the CDC all the way down to your doctor's office, they keep miscategorizing the viruses as if they're living organisms that are going to attack you. They're not. Viruses are a genetic transfer system that works on adaptation between species. And so we exude genomic information all the time. Humans exude viruses. We exude tiny little particles called microRNA. This communication network of adaptation and biodiversification is the language of life on Earth. And now we've gone and vilified that. So what's happening with glyphosate, herbicides, and this virome has to do with when you stress an organism, it needs to adapt. So when we dump glyphosate and herbicides now at the highest concentrations in the world in the middle of China, worse than the US, Midwest, worse than Brazil, China in Hubei province is the place you're going to see the highest genomic stress signal on the planet. And so it's going to come out of bacteria. Bacteria produce at least 50% of the viral genomic information on the planet. Another 50% may be coming from the multicellular organisms, like anything from any of the mammals on down to earthworms. We're all exuding all of this genomic information. And when we stress a population, it's going to send out tons of viral information for adaptation and survival. The viruses are literally not against us. They're literally creating the pathway forward for human life and otherwise. 50% of the human genome before we even showed up was built by viruses. 10% was built by retroviruses like HIV. And so we know that when we stress a system with glyphosate and the rest, we cause extinction level stress. The species are not just saying, ooh, I'm injured. The species are literally exuding a stress signal that says we're going to go extinct if we don't rapidly find adaptations to the current toxins that are being dumped on us. That's why every year we see, since 1976, we've tracked 12,800 pandemics, new viruses that are shifting around the planet. 12,800 since 1976. That's crazy. That's how many hundreds per year of new viruses that are trying to adapt life on Earth at a faster and faster rate as we increase the toxicity of our soils, water systems, air systems. The level of stress is pretty extraordinary now. There's 10 to the 31 viruses in the air. 10 to the 31 is 10 with 31 zeros after it. No name for that number. 10 to the 31 viruses in the soil. 10 to the 30 viruses in ocean water. And so ocean, soil, air, all with 10 to the 30 viruses, in those different ecosystems, exuding information on how to adapt faster and faster and faster as we reach the 6th great extinction event on the planet. It is very predictable that Hubei province was going to be the avenue that we would induce this injury.
It's interesting when you use numbers like 10 to the 31 power. It's an inconceivable number. I think I saw not long ago in a scientific publication that the universe is considered to be 10 to the 18 power seconds old. So you're talking almost double that.
We're actually 10. It's not even double because of the way that those zeros add up. So it's actually 10 million times more viruses in just the air than our stars in the entire universe. 10 million times more viruses in the air than our stars in the entire universe, not galaxy. And so billions of stars in our galaxy times billions of galaxies in the universe. And you're still 10 million times greater than that just to get the viruses in the air, let alone the viruses in the seawater. And so you have to start to realize we were so wrong about germ theory. If germ theory was right, we would have never showed up. We literally are a pixel of genomic information in the sea of genome around us.
Well, you're segueing exactly into my next question/comment, is that there's a hubris, in this idea that we're at war with this coronavirus and we have to battle, we have to defeat it. I mean, the words that are being used seem completely nonsensical to me. It shows a true lack of understanding as to what it means to exist on this planet in concert with all these things. But so number one, I just would like to see if you agree with that statement, that it's, we can't have that kind of arrogance or hubris that we can just eradicate things at our whim and kind of sniper in it. Oh, that virus, we don't like it, we'll eradicate that one. Oh, those, okay, we don't have to worry about it. Just seems like that's almost laughable. And
it is laughable.
Yeah, okay. So, and then the second thing is, you spoke about how it was predictable that this might come, that this thing could initiate, where it did in China. And did you, I think if I remember seeing you speak long before COVID, you actually were talking about this. So what did you anticipate then and how did it turn out?
Yeah, I mean, I was showing it, I gave a longer course on it at Sun Valley, Idaho, in the Wellness Festival there a year ago. But then about 3 years ago, when we were filming for the nonprofit Farmers Footprint, when we were creating our first documentary for that, I was on a farm, and for the first time I saw a glyphosate spraying map of the world, looking at depleted soils around the world. That was the first time I'd seen a global map. And the thing that's overwhelmed me right away was, oh my gosh, look at Central Asia and down into South Asia. All of our viruses that we run around the world, to go create the new influenza vaccine every year, we have to rush over there and find out which 3 or 6 strains are most prevalent in the environment. We're going to go vaccinate the whole population of that 3. And then every year or 2, we find out, oh, actually, we got the wrong strains. We didn't actually vaccinate to the right ones. Well, it's no wonder that it's impossible mission to go find the 3 or 6 species, because there's literally billions of these things, quadrillions and quadrillions of these things being cranked out of a damaged ecosystem. And so as soon as I saw those, I knew, wow, well, that's why these viruses are sourcing out of that space over the last decades, is because that's where we're doing the biggest ecologic damage. And you only have to go try to breathe air in Beijing to understand, just the level of toxicity we've reached. Hubei province, worst air pollution in the world now, because Beijing, with all of its air pollution, pushes down with the air mass to the north, and it pushes down into Hubei province just south of Beijing. And so if you overlap air pollution with soil pollution, you know that the most toxic place on the earth is going to be Hubei. And so therefore, we're going to see the highest viromic stress signals and adaptation coming out of there. And so it's the most predictable thing on the planet as to where these things are going to keep cropping up. And it has absolutely nothing to do with wet markets, by the way. This is a complete red herring that has been thrown into the equation. It's inconceivable to me that we have a CDC and a WHO saying that. I think it was from a meerkat that came across this, or there's this weird, exotic species in a wet market, and that's why we have no. It's the pig stool in Hubei province that's literally in levees. We have lakes of pig stool that cover hundreds of acres in Hubei of stool that is so toxic you can't transport. We have the same thing in North Carolina in the United States. Smithfield, and they have lakes of pig stool. In every liter, there's 10 to the 18 or 10 to the 20 viruses, every liter. And then you've got miles of this stuff. And so you're now in a viromic generation from bacteriophage and this genomic stress signal that just, again, boggles the amount of information. So there's no way that a single species in a wet market is going to be able to produce the next pandemic. It's always going to come out of this sea of stress that we're putting into the protein production industry and the mass production chemical factory farming of pork primarily, but then followed by chickens, followed by beef cattle. And so we are creating this extreme pressure. And when we hear that, well, maybe it came from actually a government laboratory over there. There's this, level 4 viromics, laboratory over there. And maybe that's where this came from. I don't know. It's remotely possible that that's where that came from. But I can tell you that there's no lab on Earth that can compete with a pile of pig stool to do this thing, because the pig stool at that kind of viromic generation that it has in a lake full of this stuff, there's no way in a petri dish where you can compete with that kind of genomic sequencing and genomic variation that could be produced just out of a liter of pig stool. And so we're too simplistic in our laboratory study of these things. We take one virus and we try to change it, and we do this, and you'll hear statistics from other doctors that say, well, we've sped up viromic mutation by 18,000 times faster than nature does it. Yeah, but that's in one virus. If you now compare that to what trillions of organisms are doing with trillions of variations of viromic things, you just can't compete. There's no way we can go as fast as the pig stool goes. And so I think that that's going to be something that we need to just take a step back and say, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a destruction of a planet that we're seeing.
Is there a relationship between vulnerability or susceptibility to a virus like COVID and people who have glyphosate in their diet, who are eating GMO foods, et cetera?
100%. Yeah. And so you can see this again. So any place that you have high residues in the soil, you end up with high residues in the water system. And so in the United States, the best water system to study is the Mississippi. It captures some 85% of the Roundup that is sprayed throughout our agricultural spaces. Our non-regulatory NGOs that are monitoring water and rain systems are showing that 75% of rain, 75% of air are contaminated with Roundup. But then you look into the food itself, and it's got incredible residues of this glyphosate and Roundup in the food itself. And so when you eat this, it disrupts the whole tight junction system, which is the barrier between the outside world and our bodies. And so when you break down the barrier between the outside world and your immune system, you're of course going to become more prone to everything, including viromic transfer and everything else. Now, viruses are supposed to enter the body, but they're supposed to do it through a regulated fashion so that the right amount of genomic information gets in to give you the genetic update to allow your body to adapt via this new genomic information, but not necessarily get overwhelmed by it. But if you now open up the barrier of the lung, you open up the barrier of the gut, now you don't have that regulatory benefit, and you're easy to get overloaded with virus. Even worse, we then partner that with pharmaceutical disruption. And so the people that died with COVID exposure didn't actually die of respiratory underpinning disease. They died of vascular and kidney disease and diabetes. And so the three major comorbidities were cardiovascular and cerebrovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and chronic kidney disease. All three of those populations have to be put on two different drugs. The first is a statin drug, and the second is an ACE inhibitor, which is a blood pressure medicine. All three of those chronic diseases should always be on those two drugs, both of which, it happens, have been well shown to upregulate the ACE2 receptor in our lungs and vascular system, which is the very receptor for COVID and many other viruses. And so we are upregulating and changing the homeostatic, balance with these viruses by pharmaceuticalizing our population. And so glyphosate in the water, opening up the gate, and then pharmaceutical increasing the absorption rate, you've got this, perfect toxic storm of abnormal biology interfacing with a completely harmless and beneficial, I would argue, respiratory virus that's trying to induce a respiratory epithelial genetic update to adapt to a toxic stew. And so we know this, and if made by nature, it is an adaptation against toxicity. It is an adaptation around toxicity. We want that update. You want these viruses, but you want them in the right dose. And so that means you need healthy, clean air to breathe. You need healthy, clean, food to eat. And you want no pharmaceuticals in your bloodstream to abnormally change the receptor quality and balance to that virus.
It's interesting. I think the general context is saying that these viruses, or even we look at the COVID virus, that they literally are messengers to facilitate our adaptation to the environment as it changes. And it's a fascinating model or fascinating view to say that, hey, we need to adapt, and through eons of time, we have, commensurate with the environment around us, adapted over time. But now we're starting to maybe say, this is a mechanism, like how does that adaptation actually occur? What are some of the mechanisms involved? And to change the view of saying, in this view over here, we're seeing that this is an enemy that we have to go to war with because it's going to kill a certain amount of the population, et cetera. And we're gonna put our best and our brightest at work to find the weapons to eradicate it. And then over here, we're saying, no, wait a minute. These are necessary components of our environment that basically are the web of our information upgrades that we need through different points in time as a species, so we can continue to properly adapt to the environment. So two wildly different, worldviews or views of reality, if you will. And of course, the premise that you start with philosophically starts to guide all your actions downstream from it. And it sounds like to me we're going enthusiastically in the wrong direction.
You just highlighted, a human philosophy that goes back to our origin, I believe, which is this manifest destiny type belief system where we're here to take over because we're the highest species and we have the highest intelligence. That's why we bothered to name ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens twice, because we're the wisest wise. And so, we have this baked in belief that we are somehow the tip of the iceberg, or we're the highest, tip on that pyramid of life on Earth. And so we have had this manifest destiny belief of like, well, we can take over everything because we're the dominant species. We've been gifted by God with this planet. And, we've got all this baked in philosophy deep into the fabric of society, religions, and the rest that have turned us into warlike creatures. And it's this mentality of war that you're speaking to that, of course, dictates the behavior of societies and empires that have risen and fallen since our origin. But we've now turned that towards health. And so we have a war on cancer. We have a war on obesity. We have a war on diabetes. We have, we have a war on depression, for God's sakes. We've got a war on everything out there. And so you can find podcasts and, Instagram feeds and hashtag, stop depression today, kill depression today. It's like, we just believe we can kill everything and therefore survive. When, of course, if we are made of the fabric of nature, the longer we separate ourselves from her and destroy her, the more we undermine our own. And we now do that at the reality of our own extinction. We're now 60 to 80 years out from human extinction, which means a child born today may be the very last human being to live a full potential of today's average lifespan of 78, 79 years. And yet we don't change our behavior for that science and that knowledge. We change our behavior over something new to fight. And so some new virus comes along that we can fight, and suddenly the whole world economy shuts down, transportation globally shuts down. who would have believed 6 months ago that we could ever shut down international travel in an instant? Who would have thought we would ever sacrifice trillions of dollars and 125 million jobs in the course of 4 weeks around the world so that we could do what? If it wasn't to fight the extinction of the planet and humanity, what were we going to change for? And we changed for a virus? Like, it just doesn't make any sense on anything, but thank God for the virus, because for the first time we just proved that we can radically change our behavior instantaneously. And I'm so excited by that. And I see that, this tragedy over George Floyd's life is emphasizing this. How many times have we seen an African American shot down in cold blood or killed mercilessly under completely illegal circumstances? We've seen it way too many times in my short lifetime, and yet this one was different. And I think it's because the philosophy, the consciousness of mankind is shifting, and so it strikes us differently. It strikes a chord that it could not have struck a year ago or 5 years ago. And so it is my hope that this virus, for all of the misperceptions, for all the scientific mistakes we made in predicting it and building the fear around it, for all of those missteps, it played the highest resonance. That virus was a bigger gift, did more for planet Earth and our relationship to her than any organization in the history of the movement. You look at any, Greenpeace, Rodale Institute, Savory Network. For 70 years, these organizations have been saying, you're killing the planet, stop doing it. And then this virus comes along and in 4 weeks does more than any of those organizations ever done. You tell me now that is not an intelligent nature that's doing that to us. There's an intelligent nature that's preying on our fears to induce the right change. And so I'm intrigued by that possibility. I'm intrigued that Mother Nature has an intelligence and she's playing a reverse psychology on us right now. Okay, they're never going to listen to the story of health, but they will listen to the story of death and disease and battle. And so let's put them in a battle state that forces them into a reactive position where they stop doing so much harm on the planet. I think that's possible, that Mother Nature's that smart.
I wouldn't underestimate her, that's for sure. And I think what I find interesting is that I think we're approaching the fail-safe point where either we wake up or we're past the fail-safe and we can't rein it back in. And it is interesting when you take a step back and you see kind of the confluence of things. I remember one time I was watching a documentary on the Eagles. I love music, so I'm always watching those types of things when I want downtime. And Joe Walsh said, guys, he's talking about the history of the Eagles, which is full of the band, all kinds of turmoil and so on. He said, there's this philosopher that said, as life is happening, it seems like chaotic and random and upheavals and all kinds of horrible things going on. But as you go down the road and you can look back, it looks like a perfectly scripted novel, the entire plot unfolding exactly how it should and how dots start to connect to create a certain outcome. And I love the positive vision that this could be one of those things. This could be a time where we are literally seeing multiple things that are maybe somewhat seemingly in the moment disrelated, how they could amalgamate into something that changes or creates a change or a transcendence in humanity that puts it on the right course. Because I really do believe we need to wake up right now. And I'm certainly very appreciative of your voice in all of this. So I thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that there's an extraordinary solution right in front of us, which is called regeneration. Yeah. Regenerative agriculture is the beginning of a regenerative economy, which is the beginning of a regenerative society. And we have never done it before. And so I can't wait to see what's going to happen over the next 10 years as we put all these pieces into place. And so if you want to visit farmersfootprint.us, it's the very first of a whole ecosystem of projects that's being put in place to radically change the regenerative environment we're living in. And this GMO Revealed project has been such an important piece of the puzzle to really reach out to the populace to say, here's 22 hours of content. You guys are incredible in your content creation, from some of the smartest minds out there in the world of human health and public health and agriculture. What is the predominance of the science showing us? And the predominance of the science is showing us the magnitude of the mistakes we've made and the opportunity that we have to reverse them quicker than we created the problem. And that's, I think, the grace of Mother Nature within her, is she heals faster than she injures. And so when we do the right thing and we realign a food system for regeneration, we realign economies and consumer product industries and transportation and energy sectors towards a model that's laid out for us. And nature knows how to do energy production better than anything else on it. And so as soon as we realign these technologies with her, she's going to heal faster. And so I don't think we're going to do extinction over the next 70 years. I think in 70 years, we could literally have the Garden of Eden on Earth. I think we could have a more abundant, biodiverse ecosystem, zero hunger, zero poverty, because we aligned with Mother Earth. There will be a balanced human population because we learn to educate, especially educate women. And through that, we will get balance to the ecosystem of human biology. What is the right number of humans on the planet? It will be proven as soon as we educate all of the women of the world. And when we do that, we will have homeostasis with our whole species in number. And then our behavior matched in that number to a regenerative state, we will see a deeper biodiversity of soils, water, air system. There will be a more resilience. I believe my grandchildren could live longer than any humans in recorded history because the earth is so healthy if we do it right.
Beautiful. Well, Zach, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and a positive vision for where this might all lead. And as always, thank you, number one, for being in GMOs Revealed. Your contribution there was just extraordinary. And also for your continued contributions now. There needs to be a voice of reason, that is speaking out right now in the midst of all this. And you're that voice as far as I'm concerned. So thank you for doing what you do. And hopefully looking forward to seeing you face-to-face sometime here soon.
Very much looking forward to that. Thank you, and to the whole audience. Thank you for being committed to a better future.